The F-14 Tomcat has made an unforgettable stamp on aviation history, from breathtaking air battles to heart-pounding air shows. Why is the F-14 Tomcat a perfect example of an airplane? What distinguishes it from the majority of the others? So buckle up and join us as we dive into the legacy of excellence of the F-14 Tomcat. The F-14 Tomcat has a colorful history, including thrilling air fights that have enthralled spectators worldwide. This fighter plane repeatedly demonstrated its mettle throughout Operation Desert Storm and the Gulf of Sidra incident. Thanks to its strong engines, sophisticated avionics, and cutting-edge armament, it was an overwhelming force in the air. The F-14 Tomcat's history can be found here. The Soviet Union was working on a family of long-range cruise missiles that could be fired from ships, submarines, and aircraft in 1960. A sufficient quantity of these missiles could defeat the most sophisticated air defenses at the time. Additionally, the U.S. Navy lacked a long-range fighter with a sizable weapon load that could intercept and shoot down Soviet missiles and planes before they approached the carrier group. The requirement for a fighter flying hundreds of kilometers away from the carrier and stopping Soviet bombers and missiles before it was too late became clear. Due to its extended range and hefty weapons load, the 1962 evaluation assessed the USAF's long-range F-111, now classified as the F-111B, as a potential naval fighter for this function. However, being a naval fighter was simply too hefty at more than 85,000 pounds. As a fighter, it was too ungainly and crashed during test flights, killing several pilots. It was therefore scrapped in 1968, and the U.S. Navy acquired a brand new fighter specially developed for carrier use. As a result, Grumman was awarded the contract in 1968 to develop a new generation of air supremacy fighters for the U.S. Navy. It needed to be able to fly at speeds faster than Mach 2.2, extremely agile, and capable of secondary strike tasks. Together with the long-range AWG-9 radar, it would deliver the AIM-154 Phoenix ultra-long-range air-to-air missile. The type that Grumman engineers ultimately picked had swing-wing and twin-turbojet engines after being tested in hundreds of different wind tunnel configurations. Each of the 20,000-pound engines that produced thrust on these turbojets was physically isolated from one another by a distance of many feet, which made them special. This turned out to be the perfect design since it allowed for the large AIM-54 Phoenix missile and two 2,000-pound bombs to be carried in space underneath the engines on the fuselage. The aircraft carrier's hangars would be difficult to maneuver because this design required a tall tail stabilizer. What were the consequences? Grumman would be subject to severe fines if the Navy's requirements weren't accomplished on time. The Navy sought a working prototype within 2 years of the project's start. The F-14 Tomcats group provided me with a list of the sanctions that would be applied if certain requirements weren't met, and those sanctions are listed below. For every 100 pounds overweight, the empty weight is 440,000. Acceleration 440,000 for every second of inaction, approach speed 1.056 million for each knot faster, escort radius 1 million for each 10 nautical miles shorter maintenance, 450,000 for every additional maintenance person hour per flight hour. Deliveries to the Navy Board of Inspection and Survey are laid at the cost of 5,000 per day. These strict incentives made sure that Grumman didn't experience any delays. On a related subject, what would happen if Lockheed Martin received these incentives for the F-35? A prototype of the F-14A flew for the first time on December 21, 1970. It was a successful flight that tested the aircraft's fundamental handling. The joy quickly ended when 9 days later, a hydraulic pump malfunction caused the prototype to crash on its second flight. The program went as planned after the test pilots safely jumped from the aircraft. A total of 12 prototypes were constructed to evaluate various settings and systems. However, during rigorous testing conducted before the integration of weaponry, 2 Tomcats were lost in harsh tests. This did not, however, stop the program from moving forward, and it was able to complete its goals. AIM-54 Phoenix missiles, which are big and heavy, had to be successfully fired to conduct vital weapons testing. An F-14 carrying 6 Phoenix missiles was given the difficult task of intercepting 6 target drones from a height of just above sea level to 100,000 feet while firing the missiles continuously in a salvo. 6 targets were to be tracked, and 6 missiles needed to be directed to each. After 5 drones were successfully shot down during this test, and the final Phoenix just missed the 6th throne, it was deemed a success. The performance criteria pleased the Navy, who authorized the F-14's manufacture. The first F-14A was delivered to the U.S. Navy on October 8, 1972, over 2 years after serial manufacturing finally started in 1972. The fact that it only took 4 years to go from project commissioning to full-scale manufacturing of such a sophisticated aircraft demonstrates Grumman's amazing efficiency. It took their Cold War enemies 12 years to accomplish a comparable feat. Once more, Grumman was tasked with the challenging task of building over 700 fighters. To project power unlike any other naval fighter of its era, it was deployed globally in the enormous supercarriers of the U.S. Navy. To provide air support for the American departure from Saigon, the U.S. Navy first sent the Tomcat to Vietnam in 1975. What are Iranian Tomcats? The F-14's export to Iran in the 1970s is the most stunning event in its history. Iran was a close friend of the U.S. in the early 1970s, but the U.S. now views it as a hostile country. This meant the U.S. provided its full backing, including cutting-edge military hardware, to fend off Iraq and the Soviet Union. The F-14 or F-15 options were presented to the Shah, who desired the newest American fighter. The F-14 was selected during a specifically organized air display demonstration. In addition to a cargo of 714 AIM-54 Phoenix missiles, Iran got 80 F-14s in 1974. Despite removing crucial mission software and hardware, the F-14 was still the best fighter at the time and the only one with Phoenix missiles that could take on the Mach 3 MiG-25. Iran, however, was a risky bet, and once the Shah was toppled in 1979, the country descended into chaos, and relations with the U.S. became strained. Iran was suddenly a hostile country with hundreds of high-tech missiles and the most modern American fighter aircraft. The Iranians had to ground these jets due to a lack of vital replacement parts after support for these F-14s was halted. How will retirement go? It was believed that the Tomcat would become obsolete by the 1980s and would have served its purpose. However, major improvements ensured that it continued to be the best for another 2 decades. While this happened, Grumman suggested significantly modified F-14s named Super Tomcats with modern avionics and performance enhancements. The U.S. Navy chose the FA-18 to replace its F-14 fleet when both projects were deemed too expensive. Approximately 1/3 less expensive and simpler to maintain, the FA-18 accomplished what the Tomcat did. In the 1990s, the F-14 began to be phased out, and by 2006, all had been done so. The FA-18 Hornets and Super Hornets have since taken their place. The comment, "The U.S. Navy made a huge mistake by retiring the Tomcat," has appeared frequently to me. However, there are several good ones. One of the reasons is that naval aircraft experience tremendous forces during takeoff and landing on carriers, which put a tremendous amount of strain on their airframe. In contrast to Air Force fighters, which can readily serve for 30 years, this reduces their service life to just 20 years. After the Cold War ended, the U.S. Navy sought less expensive, more adaptable replacements. Although the Super Tomcat models had very high performance, the Super Hornets outperformed them in terms of acquisition and operational costs, and stronger multi-role capability. Super Hornets can fit more of them on a carrier than Tomcats, since they are much smaller. How did the 400 or so F-14s that were retired fare? Naturally, not every one of them was discarded. Many of these aircraft had their critical electronics removed and were now on display in U.S. military bases, museums, and memorials. They were partially scrapped, and their components were recycled. If an emergency requires them to restart the F-14s, a small number are stripped and maintained in reserve storage. But for now, Iran is your only choice if you want to witness an F-14 in action. This is how the most well-known fighter of the U.S. Navy came to an end. It now lives on in static models, the emotions of its pilots, and the devotion of its ardent admirers. Folks, there you have it, the fascinating past and exceptional qualities of the F-14 Tomcat. This incredible aircraft has irrevocably changed aviation history with its outstanding performance and iconic design. The F-14 Tomcat will always be known as a model of perfection in military aviation, from its air fights and exhilarating takeoffs to its flawless landings and dazzling airshow displays. What are your thoughts on the F-14 Tomcat? Leave your answers in the comment section below, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you guys soon.